Derrick Broze. Welcome back to the Grand Theft World. How you doing, bro?
Hey, I'm doing good, brother. Thanks for having me back. Looks like you guys are having another good show.
Thanks for writing this juicy article. Let me grab it here. Woo! And you brought in the heavy hitters. You brought in Burmis and Whitney, and there's a lot of good information in here. Let me put it on screen so the audience can see the title of it, and they can go start looking at it too. Let me see if I can get it closer up. The Biden administration embraces technology with promise of $2 billion in funding for the bioeconomy. That's the key word, bioeconomy, under your skin. So what inspired you to write this? It's kind of a rigged question, right?
Obviously, just trying to keep up with all the news going on. But, I've said this before with the way I write articles and approach certain topics that I'm not typically going to be the first one to write about a breaking story because I like to wait and gather my facts. And, as I'm sure you see, Richard, there's always like a rush of people in the independent alternative media to say this thing, report this thing. And then sometimes I think in that hurry, people miss maybe some deeper details or the bigger picture. So, yeah, I saw this when it first happened a couple weeks ago and saw Burmis talking about it and a few other, places talking about it. Ryan was talking about it. Ryan asked me if I'd want to dive deeper into it. And I actually had my mind on something else at the time, but I decided to just start writing it with the focus on the executive order. And then the more I looked into it and kind of actually looked at what the Biden administration has been up to, it's like, oh, wait, they hosted a summit. Okay, they got this new appointment. They're really making a lot of moves in this area. So it wasn't just like a single executive order. It was like a whole week of different actions embracing this new industry that most people have never heard of.
Well, let's break it open because not everyone watches you or Burmis and they don't know about the executive order. So Biden administration had this executive order in the past couple of weeks, and they do this all the time and we don't really pay attention to it. But this one applies to technology under everyone's skins, and there's some scary language in there. Like they're going to start recoding our DNA and stuff like that. And it just seemed like Alex Jones conspiracy theory type thing, but it's coming from the White House. So yeah, help us unpack it for the audience.
Yeah, so the exact executive order, let's see if I have it right in front of me. The title is Advancing Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing Innovation for a Sustainable, Safe, and Secure American Bioeconomy. So all the typical buzzwords. I'll say that I think what most people are probably familiar with in terms of biotechnology would be things like genetic engineering, genetic modifying of foods. Like that's a type of biotechnology. Monsanto is a biotechnology company, right? They're not a seed company. They're not a pesticide company. They're a biotechnology company.
And we have to do that because there's world hunger, Derrick. So they have to have Monsanto creating Satan seeds and stuff, right?
Exactly, right. So Monsanto's biotech products are here to save the planet, and we're all thankful for it.
You don't want kids to die from starvation, Derrick. Why are you hating on those people?
You gotta get the GMO golden rice. Yeah, so that's kind of, I think, the way that most people would be familiar with biotechnology, but obviously that's like a very broad category, broad industry. But this term bioeconomy and biomanufacturing, it's, I think, a bit more new. I'd become somewhat familiar with biomanufacturing last year, which ties into this story. We'll get into that in a bit on Ginkgo Bioworks and some of the companies working on this. But essentially what this executive order does is it's kind of maybe one step in a bunch of steps that are, kind of faded to us and coming, ahead of us in a couple of years. I hate to say it, but it just seems like so much of this is like, okay, we'll play this card and 6 months later we'll do this. We're going to issue a report and we're all kind of going inevitably towards this world that they want. But, this is the Biden administration taking like a stronger position and saying, we want to invest in biotechnology, which again includes genetic engineering, what's becoming known as synthetic biology. They talk about specifically, as you mentioned in the executive order, being able to write cells like circuitry. So that kind of will give you some idea of like what this thing is about. And biomanufacturing itself is that whole industry which most people, again, I don't think most people are even aware of this, that there are companies out there that are already, like their product, what they do is they mess with DNA. They alter DNA in a lab, or they're like messing with maybe just a single cell, but they're trying to see how they can, replicate it or merge it with another animal, or just all kinds of weird stuff. That things, some of that I think people are familiar with, others they might not be familiar with. But overall, this industry, it relates to altering life, bio biology, life, technology. I mean, it's right there in the words, the bringing together of life and technology, digital technology, machine. It's part of the transhumanist agenda. I mean, at first, when I was, like you said in the beginning, I kind of mentioned Patrick Wood, I mentioned Jason Burmis, and when I was first writing, my goal wasn't necessarily to like debunk them per se, but I was going to try to take a sort of devil's advocate approach. Like, okay, hey, people are saying this is all about transhumanism. Well, let's dive in and look deeper and see if that's true. And, ultimately, I kind of landed on the same conclusion as them.
Yeah, it's no fun to be in groupthink and be inaccurate, but when other people are, saying something, I'm often incredulous. I'm like, nah, and I dig into it. I'm like, oh, geez, it's worse than what they're saying. It's worse than what they're saying. Yeah, you got to read it for yourself. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say there's a prescriptive ideology behind it, because these are just tools, these are just technologies. It's the way in which they're being used and implemented. So I do like the fact that you're sort of trying to take a dialectical approach, a devil's advocate approach. Unfortunately, their ideology seems to reign supreme in regards to the way in which they want to implement this, not only to us as individuals, but across the planet in regards to manipulating nature itself.
I think that's really important. You added that, Tony. I appreciate that, because I'll quote one section I did here from the article that you're right. I mean, the technology it totally depends on the people who are in charge of this. And I've gotten attacked by some in the independent media over the last year for just kind of what I think taking a more objective approach and saying, hey, what if some of these companies like Ginkgo Bioworks, the one I focus on, they're also invested in genetic engineering of cannabis companies. And, personally, I like my cannabis as the creator made it. But let's say that they could use genetic engineering and there was no side effects and this strain, helped a cancer patient or something, right? Like objectively, we should be able to say like, okay, there's biotechnology doing some good in the world. And often, and I think in our communities, there is a very knee-jerk, dare I say, anti-science kind of view of things because of the things we know that the predator class is also trying to do. So it's kind of like a knee-jerk reaction. But I guess the approach I've been sort of taking with all of this, not just biotechnology, biomanufacturing, this whole bioeconomy conversation, but the whole technocratic transhumanist world we're moving into, we all have to make decisions about how we're going to interact with that world. Like we're already doing this to some degree today, right? Like I don't use banks, haven't used banks since 2008. That's not a decision everybody's going to make, right? Well, some people are going to choose to do the contact lens, heads up display, facial recognition scanning, and that's going to give them advantages over people like us who stay, old school human and choose not to merge, or maybe some people go to a certain extent, but they're like, no, that's too far. I'm not putting the chip in, or, whatever. I mean, we're going to see these different lines. And I think that's the conversation really that's, underneath all this is how are we going to choose to stay human in the coming years and decades, and what ways are we going to consciously, because if you're unconsciously, you're just probably going to walk right into the Borg, consciously interact with these different technologies.
Patrick Wood said when we interviewed him that he actually was interviewed by Steve Bannon, who is part of a policy advisor for Trump during the Trump administration. He thinks in the next 7 to 10 years, the biggest policy questions are going to be around this transhumanistic situation in regards to identity. How much that changes identity, as Klaus Schwab says. Well, to take a genetic, procedure, it changes you, or butchering the quote, but that's sort of the idea, which is quite scary. But to your point, there will be significant advantages to those individuals that do participate in that system. But then, what are their criteria for participating in that system? Track, tracing, databasing, vaccines. What do we have to alter about ourselves in order to be allowed to participate in the CBDC? Central bank digital CBDC, the digital currency, situation where we have to have our vaccines and we have to be tied to all these databases. I mean, it's a little scary to consider the implications, but to your point, I do appreciate that, because what you said in regards to the polarization that happens, especially in alternative communities, especially in anti-scientific polarization, that's something I've combated quite dramatically in regards to making sure we look at all sides and just how of the argument, and making sure we understand that, science is pretty nuanced and pretty specialized, very specialized. So we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater in regards to the individuals that are using it for their own nefarious purposes.
Absolutely.
I want to cover this one point right here. The White House specifically mentions, quote, the need to develop genetic engineering technologies and techniques to be able to write circuitry for cells and predictably program biology in the same way in which we write software and program computers. They claim this will help to unlock the power of biological data. Now, I'm a little skeptical of their intentions here. What do you think, man? You think this is a good idea? Command and control over biology? game
That
over,
doesn't
man.
sound like, yeah, like, and honestly, I'm surprised that they were even this blatant and forward in that one sentence there, because the rest of it is kind of like just gobbledygook political speak, bolster this, invest in this, et cetera. There's very little other details. There's a few other things talking about making it clear that this relates to the climate agenda, and sustainability and all that stuff. But yeah, I think that line really makes it clear. And then, as I say, excuse me, in the next paragraph, that there's really only one line in there that even says anything about like, we're going to make sure this aligns with the principles and values and international best practices, and to reduce accidental or deliberate harm to people, animals, or the environment. And, of course, these are the people that have been trying to cover up any discussion around gain of function research, or, you can go back for decades, right, and discuss like all the nefarious, dangerous things the government has been up to. And yeah, these people are now telling us that they're going to create a whole new economy, the bioeconomy, involving biomanufacturing that uses things like genetic engineering. I wanted to point out, just to kind of, because I do think it's hard to really get to the meat of what it is, but just to give the definition that they provided, at least, they said biomanufacturing is the use of biological systems, so that could be man, animal, whatever, to develop products, tools, and processes at commercial scale. Biomanufacturing is a type of manufacturing or biotechnology that, quote, utilizes biological systems to produce commercially important biomaterials and biomolecules for use in medicines, food, beverage, and industrial applications. And they talk about this as coming from natural sources such as blood, cultures of microbes, animal cells, plant cells grown in specialized equipment, and these cells then being used in biomanufacturing, which could be derived from genetic engineering. So it's just like a whole bunch of like trying to take biological material, as they say, blood, animal products, like I guess cells, humans, whatever, cultures, and use those to test and create new forms of products. And as I talk about, they also talk about this relating to the circular economy, which at its most basic, non-nefarious level is, hey, let's try to be less wasteful. Let's take care of the planet. Those kinds of things I think most of us can get behind. But then, of course, we know that it's masking the deeper agenda about the sustainability and such. But that's the way that they're selling it. We're already starting to hear more and more of this circular economy. Now, in this, I found references to the circular bioeconomy, right? So like you have your waste product. Let's say you ate an animal, you have bones, you have meat left over, or your own waste or plant matter, whatever. Maybe there's a future where they're taking that material and companies are buying it from you, or you're giving it to them directly, probably. And then they use that to create a cup made from your own shit, or a t-shirt made from the waste of an animal. All kinds of things that, again, could be applied in very creative, helpful ways. That's like the basis of what is called the bioeconomy, biomanufacturing. But then there's the whole other part that I get into with Ginkgo Bioworks that actually does involve, and as they even say, they're like learning how to write cells like circuitry, and then the key term, predictably programmed.
I wrote that down. Yeah, that said everything to be predictably programmed. That's a very scary term. The fact that they
So it's all part of, it's just like the same thing. It's part of the Great Reset, transhumanism, sustainable development goals, Agenda 2030. This is just like, now we're kind of getting a little bit more, I guess, details of what the specifics are going to look like. We know about transhumanism. We know about that ideology. We know about the idea of technocracy and using technology and tools and rule by experts and all that. And the bioeconomy, biomanufacturing seems to be one of the ways they're going to do this. And I do have a conspiracy theory about this that I didn't include in the article because I don't like to put my theories in when I can't prove them, but I'm happy to share it with you guys if you're interested.
Yeah, put up the graphic that has speculation on it. No. What's your opinion?
Well, my opinion, kicked my camera. My opinion is that this bioeconomy could, and again, like I'm saying this with just taking pieces of this, but nothing hard documentation. I think this is a Soylent Green precursor situation we're dealing with here. Talking about biomass, that's another term that I'm seeing put around. I think that eventually, and at the same time, and again, not on its own a bad thing. Like places like California, just making it legal to turn yourself into a tree or turn your human waste into other things once you die, right? That kind of normalization, that's biomass, right? That's part of the bioeconomy. That's part of biomanufacturing, right? So there could be a program in the future, voluntary or otherwise, where human remains become repurposed.
Hunger.
Yeah, or something. I'm just saying, because this is what they're talking about. They're talking about using genetic engineering to take biomass, the part of the bioeconomy, and that we've heard that that's living things of various kinds, and repurpose it for this circular, sustainable economy.
And notice the circular is a closed
cannibalism.
system.
They've been repurposing cannibalism recently.
They have been promoting cannibalism, yes. So that, I mean, like, again, I don't have the paper or anything yet to prove it, but would I be surprised if in the coming years that's where it's going? No, not at all.
And spoiler alert, Soylent Green is people.
Yeah. Exactly.
So between the trays of mold that we saw Bill Gates and Anderson Cooper talking about, all the, eat the bugs, these sort of things, you're right. They're changing people's attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs to be more in line with a global communist. It's like an eco-communist agenda. And while you were talking, I see sometimes I see things in memes. So I had this Samuel L. Jackson meme came up that said, "Say bio one more time." But we'll have to make that during the intermission. And then the other idea is that these people who make bioweapons are now bringing us the bioeconomy. And I think that should catch people like, whoa, what? Double take? What's going on? Because that's literally what's going on. Now they're writing executive orders about it. They're not like hiding it in some meeting at, NASA or DARPA or someplace. They're just like, okay, this is what we're doing. And this is coming down from on high from King Chucky III, World Economic Forum, United Nations, like this whole Build Back Better thing that Biden has going on. It's all top down. So ARPA too, the ARPA-H that they announced last year.
Yeah, and so that I think is sort of another component of it too, right? Because like you said, they didn't just do the executive order, plain clear language and those couple of sentences that tell you everything you need to know, but it was the appointment of Renee. I still can't figure out how to pronounce her name, but this woman from Ginkgo Bioworks, who's now the head of ARPA-H, and what that means, but then also this summit. And I didn't include this in the article because it was just extra detail, but in the summit, I found like statements and reports from the summit, the White House summit on advancing biotechnology, all this stuff. So they had different companies that are in that industry come like as essentially just pitch their products and say, hey, we're part of the bioeconomy and this is what we do. And it was things like, I can't remember the company's name, but they're creating, how did they say? It was like carbon neutral meat products or something like that, and it's called air protein if you look that up. And then just some other really weird stuff, but it was just kind of like showing you the type of ideas. Yes, the way Biden's pitching is like, we're going to solve Alzheimer's, we're going to cure cancer using biomanufacturing, and that's the way they want people to think about it. It's like, oh, we're coming into the future where the genetic engineering is going to solve all our problems and everything, and now we can hand over our cells to these people. But clearly, there's another agenda there. But I do think that if you look up companies like Ginkgo Bioworks, look up the term synthetic biology and look in that industry, and you're going to see these names that you probably never heard of, but they've been funded by Bill Gates and others that you do know. And the reason I wrote about, actually, when I published this, I was tweeting out that Whitney wrote about ARPA-H, Whitney Webb, she wrote about ARPA-H last year in like the spring of 2021. Then a couple months later, I wrote about Ginkgo Bioworks. And here we are a year later, and the VP of Ginkgo Bioworks is being appointed the head of ARPA-H.
Well, it's those revolving doors. And if you let enough time pass, the people that were involved in one thing, now they're going to be involved over here. This part grabbed me right here. As Nature notes, quote, launched in March with a $1 billion budget, ARPA-H aims to shake up the conventional model of funding biomedical research, deemed too slow and conservative in its scope and approach by some critics. Funding high risk, high reward research in the life sciences. What do you think high risk is? Do you think that has something to do with gain of function? I think that's the next paragraph. But what do you think that means? To me, it means nature can't do this on its own. So we need a bioweapons lab to be able to break these things apart and make these chimeras and then use them for an agenda, which they clearly used. The last one that has an agenda to have control over like 208 countries at once in lockstep.
Yeah, no, I think that's and that's why I made just that kind of reference in case it, that thought missed, anybody missed it. It's like, hey, the people we spent the last 2.5 years lying about everything, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of what's going on in these labs and funding of this and all that, and not even knowing really what's happening there, right? Those people are now saying again, things are moving too slow, too conservative. We want to move forward with high risk, potentially high reward, which is honestly, I think, probably the exact same thing that we've heard them say about gain of function over the years, particularly Fauci, when they're saying like the potential reward of studying these high risk pathogens is that we can then develop a vaccine that prevents, if somebody blah, 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 whatever. It's the same argument that hasn't held up, and I don't see any reason why any of us should feel any more comfortable with these same people now saying they're going to put $1 billion. And then I found other reports. This is actually like very low funding, apparently, according to what the industry and the people involved in ARPA-H are seeking. And there's like, I mean, again, there was more research that I just didn't add, but there's actually like this interesting battle going on right now about who's going to get ARPA-H, like where is it going to be headquartered? All the companies like Ginkgo Bioworks that are based in Boston, and anybody knows the Boston area and that whole like the intelligence communities, the academia, and Boston Dynamics, and just there's a lot going on there, right? So they're fighting to keep the ARPA-H in Boston, and then there's, I think some people are trying to get it in Texas, and then probably Austin or something like that, and then a couple other places. So there's definitely a lot of moving pieces here that I didn't even really dive into because. For anybody who feels like it, what I think would be interesting is to look up those main places. It's not hard to find them. It's basically Boston, Texas, and there's one other place. But to look at the companies and the people who are already based there and the people who are fighting to get them to their area and why that might be, because I think there's going to be a lot of connections there.
Now, when you're talking about they want, these other things are too slow and they want to do this high risk stuff, it reminded me of the Michael Milken Institute meeting with Fauci and Rick, the guy from BARDA.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking of as well.
They're saying we grow these things in chicken eggs and it takes too long. And we have this mRNA technology, but there's too much bureaucracy and red tape. And if only we had a special event like a new Pearl Harbor. Oh, wait, that was a different thing. But only we had an emergency where we could, PNAC style, just take this over. And they had it during the pandemic. So they said it in October 2019. Then it happened. And I think
there's also this too, to what Derrick is saying. This was I won't play the clip, but the chief executive of Bayer, Stefan Ulrich, states that COVID vaccines are gene therapy and that it conditioned the public to now accept gene therapies for the future. Because that's explicitly what he says in that clip at the World Health Summit. That was back 2021, somewhere in there. So, and then he goes on to state that it really conditioned the acceptance of the public. As you said beforehand, if we were to poll the public on would they take a gene therapy, it would be dismal. But after this, now we can expect to roll this out in all areas of life and therapeutics and beyond just the need for dealing with the diseases, potentially altering the genome in order to extend life and artificially improve cognition and consciousness functions, intelligence, these sorts of things.
I also wanted to mention $1 billion. Derrick's right. That's not a lot to put in the ARPA-H because it's just 3 times CNN Plus funding. Right? Because they got $300 million for that failure. And
they didn't even get it. They didn't even get a bioweapon out of it.
Yeah, right. Well, they got Jeffrey Toobin. It's kind of an online virus sensation that's spread around.
I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, Richard, but I think if we haven't gotten to it yet, probably a good time that Renee Wegrzyn, my best attempt, who is now the head of ARPA-H, coming from Ginkgo Bioworks, still officially on their team, that she's also coming from a DARPA background. She's worked with DARPA on half a dozen or more projects that I found. It's really interesting, actually. I think this lady is going to be very key, and we might hear her name for some time to come, because I found like a whole host of projects in her DARPA portfolio. But then she also worked at the other agency that they said was DARPA inspired, the Intelligence Advanced Research Project Agency, or IARPA. And then she also advised ARPA-E, Advanced Research Project Agency Energy. So working directly with DARPA, working with 2 other DARPA-inspired agencies, and now the head of a third DARPA-inspired agency, ARPA-H.
Yeah, we have a GTW subscriber. She does fantastic work called the COVID Collaborators. She's doing a blog spot going over the COVID initiative in regards to Philip Zelikow and crafting a useful myth in regards to the origins and failure of the COVID-19. And she entitled it's the COVID Collaboration Project. What's interesting is when you go into these individuals, everything you're saying is exactly to what she says here. And I'll just quote, because I think you'll find it interesting. I'll share this with you outside of it. But alongside McClellan, whose company engages in research projects for DARPA, sits Dr. Richard Danzig, who sits on the board of directors of the Center for the New American Security as a consultant to the IARPA, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the trustee of the RAND Corporation. Dr. Julie Gerberding, the executive vice president of Merck, also made it to the table. I think that Tom Inglesby is implicated, he was the MC for Event 201. And he's also, because what's interesting about this, and the reason we bring that up and bring up her incredible work, is that it's oftentimes a revolving door of all these various alphabet soups between IARPA, DARPA, ARPA, and a lot of these individuals actually sort of either sit on the board or consultants to all of these organizations, which is very troubling in regards to how many different research intelligence agencies there are, advanced research projects agencies there are, and sort of what they try to specialize in, and how many of them all sort of are entangled with not just DARPA, but then there's ARPA, IARPA, DOD, so forth and so on. It gets kind of scary. And this is the one to piggyback on your point you made there, because a lot of those individuals seem to do that.
A lot of them seem to be on the board or they suck under the table. That's usually one of the positions that they take up in those situations. I wanted to hit up this point because, there are people that think Ginkgo Bioworks, they're doing this biology by design because, some MIT scientists need a better weed source. And they're like, we're going to do it ourselves. But it's not just that, is it? And if you read this article, they're a partner with the World Economic Forum, says here. And that's the Great Reset agenda. I've heard about that. So what else are they doing besides messing with cannabis?
So I think one, and I was kind of hinting at this earlier, but I found this quote from Jason Kelly, the CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks. And he actually attended the White House summit on biotechnology and everything.
Is this it? Can I read it for you?
Yeah, go for it.
Following the White House's announcements on the bioeconomy, Jason Kelly, CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks, clearly outlined the role and job of his company. Quote, today, Ginkgo is the largest designer of synthetic DNA in the world. What does that mean? It means you can go to a computer, you can type ATC GGG and hit print, and a piece of DNA gets printed out of our labs in Boston or partner companies like Twist in California. Then we take that DNA and we put it into the genome of a cell, like installing an app on your phone, only your phone's your body, and it makes the cell do something new. That's our business. We do that as a service for our customers.
Is that part of the synthetic biology you mentioned earlier?
Yeah,
okay?
that's basically they're one of the leading companies in the synthetic biology sector.
They say weed's a slippery slope. You're proving it right here. They went from making cannabis to transhumanism and take over the human race.
One thing I'll say about that, sorry, just real quick, is, as it looks like my camera is probably going to die soon, I apologize, that this talk we mentioned earlier, Richard, with the circuitry, writing the cells, et cetera, it's this whole, and then you were saying earlier, Tony, with the mRNA, as it looking at it as a software updates, right? Like that's the way that they want this all to be about. And that's what the whole thing was about, getting people used to mRNA, getting them used to this type of technology. And in the future, I think they really do want it to be where you just you show up to the station and they, take a sample of your DNA, or you get their DNA upgraded. I listened to a talk actually from this woman, Renee, what's her name, for an hour. I probably should have included the clip in there and I'll send it to you guys if you want to play it later. It's it's an hour of her talking about the industry, nothing too that stands out too much, but there was a couple of moments where she does acknowledge that we're moving into the transhumanist age. She doesn't call it transhumanism, but the age where you're going to run into people, and this is what she said, you're going to run into people and you're going to ask, what genes are you on? Because you're going to be able to easily upgrade your genes with the latest software update, and you're going to have different eye colors or different this and whatever, different features and enhancements and stuff. And that's the way that we're going to approach people, is that we're going to be plugged in not only to the metaverse or whatever that way, but then just altering or modifying our genes temporarily, permanently, who knows? And that's going to be kind of the conversation, is like, oh, what did you do with your genes today? What gene download do you have? Or are you, modeling or showing?
With the Levi's app.
Which is incredibly disconcerting, because I have a friend who works in neuroscience, and he specifically specialized in genetic mutation in brain disease, different types of brain diseases. And he said you affect one gene, you affect a whole cascade of genes, which hence why you take a polygenic score, which means you take a score of, thousands and thousands of genes and see micro mutations. And it's about the totality of all these various mutations on a range of genes that creates the capacity or potential for disease in certain areas. So he was like, for example, when the CRISPR thing came out with a Chinese scientist a couple years ago who engineered a baby, I believe, that then was HIV intolerant or something to that effect. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other issues with that. He's like, that that's the issue. It's a domino effect. You affect one gene, you affect a small group of genes, and that can change the entire wiring of the body. So it sounds like these corporations, I wonder if they're almost just engineering firms. I don't know if they're too concerned about necessarily the ramifications. I know with Dr. Robert Califf out of Duke University, along with the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Klaus Schwab's WF agenda.
They can print people now.
Well, the idea, he's specializing in World War data. You don't have to do any randomized controlled trials anymore. We'll just track trace database and come up with a therapeutic gene editing right in it's a scary thought, because it sounds like they're more engaged in engineering. Good, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you're so right with hitting on the engineering point. To that point, like I literally was just pulling up the talk from that woman. I'm gonna send it over to you guys, and it's titled "Engineering Gene Safety." So I mean, they see themselves as engineers of the human biology, of human DNA. Like that's where we're at now. And CRISPR, that talk she mentions CRISPR, it's definitely playing a major role in this as well, for sure. And again, I mean, that's not to say like I really don't. I'm not anti-technology, and that doesn't mean just digital technology, but like scientific technology and things that are honestly beyond my total understanding. I don't have the time to really fully commit to be completely well versed in it, but I can know enough to write about it and to understand it and share it with people. And there's some things that I could see that could potentially, in maybe a perfect world, a different world than we're in, be used for good, but it definitely doesn't. It seems like whatever potential goods that might make their way through the finish line are going to pale in comparison to the techno-transhumanist slavery we'll be existing in.
I agree. And that's because of the sort of prescriptive ideology they're basing it on, this idea of overpopulation and that humans are this sort of misanthropic doctrine of the humans are the problem. And that's the issue, because this technology really could be used to sort of usher in a whole new sort of renaissance or golden age or whatever one wants to call it. But instead, unfortunately, the ethical choices of the individuals that are perpetuating these technologies are very dubious and under much scrutiny. So we'll have to see how it manifests. But I agree. And I do appreciate the fact that you're willing to stand up and understand that technology itself is just a tool. And it's up to the user and the inventor and how they'll sort of, go about utilizing that tool, I guess, or how they'll present it to the public. So I appreciate that quite a bit, because I know that's something that level of nuance sometimes gets lost. And I understand why. Especially with what happened the past couple of years, it's very easy to mistrust science completely. But let's not forget the incredible advancement of science. We're talking to one another through supposedly electrons traveling down copper wires. So
thanks to DARPA.
They bump into each other. I was just about to say, Derrick, we've dared your camera long enough. From a producer perspective, I knew you were probably okay, it's about to go dead. Your article is on thelastAmericanVagabond.com. And where can we find more of your work and support your current endeavors and your other special reports?
So I pretty much write on a weekly basis for The Last American Vagabond. So if you found that article, or if people have links to that article, there's an author page. You can just follow that to keep up with my weekly articles. And then my kind of reports I do on my own, which are typically more video, or at theconsciousresistance.com. I try to do both because honestly, I always end up writing too much. Whitney and I talk about this, Whitney Webb, I talk about this, dang, I think I went too deep, because how many people are actually going to read this article, right? It went from 1,000 words to 3,000, but I think it flows well enough, and I hope people read it. But my point is that I tend to make videos on the Conscious Resistance about my articles, because I know, I get it. Sometimes it's easier just to listen while you're doing other things, and, you don't have time to get into it. But I do always highly encourage people to read the articles, because you're just going to get more depth and understanding reading it in your own eyes, with your own mind, instead of just hearing me tell you about it.
100%. All right. And while folks are over at Last American Vagabond, type in Whitney Webb plus DARPA and read that January 2019 article she wrote, and then go back and read this circular bioeconomy article again, because it's the same group of people. It's finite planet. Only so many people want to take us over and make us transhuman, right? Thank you, Derrick, for taking time out of your busy schedule, bro.
Fantastic work.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
It's a privilege to be able to talk to the author of an article like this. So thanks for coming on, and enjoy
Thank you.
the rest
Appreciate that, man. You too.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show, we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come